everyone. Welcome back to Those Millennial Pediatricians. I'm Dr. Aniksha,
And I'm Dr. Deshna.
and this is the podcast where we talk about all things children's health in bite-sized, relatable pieces. Today is a really special episode that we're both super, super excited about. Deshna, do you want to kind of talk to us about what we're going to talk about today?
So we have a very special guest on with us today. We have Tina John. I think she's going to be a revolutionary figure in the breastfeeding
Agreed.
postpartum space. We are going to talk about a business that she has developed to support working mothers in the postpartum era in our current society, and a little bit of background on her before we talk about all about Tina and before she does her spiel. I found her through my sister-in-law who attended a UX design conference, and she like frantically texted me after and she was like, "You have to have this person on." Yeah, it was like a pitch and she was like, "This is the best pitch I have heard." And she's so personable, so passionate about breastfeeding, and totally applicable to all the parents who listen to your podcast. So we are going to talk about postpartum care, variants across different cultures, Tina's own background with her own postpartum journey.
So she's a biomedical engineer, she's a mother of three, and then she's founder and CEO of Avira Health, which is where they're creating beautiful solutions for the unmet needs of mothers, particularly in the postpartum time period. So thanks so much for joining us, Tina. We're so excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Aniksha and Deshna. It's a real honor to be on with both of you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about, in general, like starting Avira Health and your personal and professional connection to the maternal infant space?
Yeah, so I am a biomedical engineer. I have three girls, and at some point in my life, these two things started to intersect. So producing medical devices for the human body, and then realizing slowly, both as I had my babies, but then as women around me and people I loved started to have their infants, grow their families, and then start breastfeeding, there were too many stories to count behind closed doors about moms doing everything they could for their infants, but feeling like they were failing them. And that really touched home for me because having an infant made me realize, oh my God, this is so much more than I expected it to be. I think in one particular time when I had my first, there was a moment in the first week where I was thinking, oh my gosh, I am educated, I have a good job, I'm well supported by both sides of my family, and this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And thinking about my grandmother who had 9 kids, and thinking, oh, I'm like, she's a titan amongst, like no matter what I might have done and went to school to do, it's amazing what women for generations and generations have been putting on their shoulders. And so, with that context, as I heard more women around me struggling with breastfeeding, it just came to a point. It's like, there must be a way for us to let women breastfeed if that's what they want to do. And that started me off on this whole journey of incorporating technology and breastfeeding together and really going, we talk about AI and, kind of the data and the resources that it takes to in order to further the humans are in one way we are thinking about the next step when we get to the physical space and what are those almost, I would say, bio robotics that are going to, in a beautiful way, aid women and aid mothers and families.
I love that, Tina. I love to see you taking advantage of this in a definitely interesting time we're living in and using it for something like this. And so many women can benefit from it. I can count on my two hands like the amount of moms that I see in my clinic every day would benefit from this, and I'm excited for them to listen to.
Yeah, I think it just reminds me that like yes, there is a certain thing that we may find beautiful and comfortable and what we want for ourselves and for our infants and our families, and I think that needs to be fully represented. It can't be technology that's built for what the masses know and not include what we want for our families. So we get to have it our way too.
Yeah, I love that. I think also the idea of especially now everyone's like breastfeeding and being a mom, all this stuff is so natural. And even though it exists in nature, even though it's biologically part of us, I think there's so much of it that feels unnatural, and it doesn't just come to you. There's so much practice and learning involved in it. And so for you to kind of share your knowledge and build upon that to build things that help other moms have an easier time, I think is so helpful, because it is such a challenging time, and we still don't talk about it enough. And I think as pediatricians, we're like, okay, great, let's make sure the baby's gaining weight and all that kind of stuff, and we do some postpartum care, which we'll talk about in this episode, but it's still certainly not the focus, and it really should be. Yeah.
I am really curious about both of your perspectives as pediatricians who get to be around closely in those first weeks. What do you see kind of in women's eyes and what they're facing? And then also, is it often in the very first week where you're seeing those breastfeeding questions surface? Does it come otherwise like second week or by the month, or is it like right away when the baby is, within a couple days?
I would say almost like bimodal. So I see it first when the baby's born, but it's also when they are transitioning from, let's say if they do plan on going back into the working space, how can I make this sustainable as I even transition from the home to back to like my own working lifestyle routine, stuff like that.
I think it usually, what we see, it touches on a few different points. So I think in the first week, the first few days, right, when your baby's already losing weight, and that's kind of our biggest focus, that and jaundice. I think a lot of moms feel that pressure of, I'm still recovering, I'm still in so much pain, but I need to provide, like breastfeeding is best, why isn't my milk coming in? All those stresses that are natural and temporary, but they can seem like a big deal when you're coming into the office and we're talking about weight loss and things like that. I think that's one big part of it. And then I notice, like, when the other parent might go back to work, so whether it's paternal, maternal, whatever leave, if they're alone or if there are grandparents in the house who leave after a few weeks, then there's that sudden change, right? And I think we always talk about it takes a village. It like really does. And we'll talk about how in our culture, like oftentimes it is the full village, but here maybe not so much in Western society. And so I got a lot of moms who say, like, my husband or my partner went back to work and now it's just me, and now the colic has set in and I don't know what to do, and it's really tough and they won't eat. Do I need to cut stuff out of my diet? Like all these new questions come up. And so I think there's that bimodal of, I need to be able to be the provider, and then going to being, I am now the sole provider. And that's really, really hard. And I think that transition is so, so hard. And even though they're temporary, I'm sure, Tina, you went through this, even though it's temporary, you're still feeling it day in, day out. Those days can probably feel so, so long. And you can, you try to get the best support you can, but it's not like you can get everything all the time. And so I think it's definitely, I think, tough. And then seeing the recovery period too, and the stress and the pain and all of that. I think as pediatricians, I'm so grateful that we get to help in between, like before that 6-week check-in with the OB. But I'm always like, wow, I wish we could help more. I wish we could do more, because I can only imagine how hard this is at home.
It's really great to hear about that as a first line insight, because when I look at things through a like a design perspective, right? So it's, do we have a clinical need in place? And then is there data to back that? And it's something that we really feel strongly about. Those are like the success factors to creating something that's going to affect a lot of people from a biological system standpoint. Early on in researching, all right, what's actually happening? What's going on? Like, why are so many women complaining about the same thing? Why are so many women down about this? It was like within the first 2 to 4 weeks, you have like a 20% drop off in breastfeeding. And one of the statistics that came out of this as I was researching was that successful breastfeeding does not correlate with a particular culture or race. It actually correlates with ample support in the home, and family situations where there was grandma, mom, aunt showing techniques, taking the baby away, doing all the other work. And it was just fascinating, because that's not inherently how we're set up in the West. And it's almost like sometimes I watch, my friends and the people around me, it's like it's almost become like a bit of a zombie after that point, and they don't know why. But in actuality, we are really, really only getting through this time period when you have a lot of hands to help you. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
It's kind of leaning into the collectivism versus the individualism that we're kind of conditioned to do. especially it's clear that, I mean, you kind of talked about your personal and professional connection to maternal and infant health. So if you can give us a little background, what is Avira Health?
Yeah, so I'm a biomedical engineer who is traditionally working in creating prosthetics for the human body. So knee implants, hip implants, novel types that use both, let's say, both drugs and devices to clear periprosthetic joint infection. That was one of the things that I had worked on. And Avira Health was started in a similar mode of creating a medical device for that it would be an FDA cleared medical device, but in order to help with breastfeeding and and overcoming obstacles in breastfeeding for mothers and infants. And so my background is not in, it's a classic startup. It is not, my background's not in business. My goals and my passions were always developing physical products that would influence many people at the same time. I had always loved the areas of both NICU and infant health. Becoming a mother was a big part of my life's fulfillment. I would think it was very easy for me to go head over heels into being the best that I could be for my kids. And I see that constantly with moms. They want to be the best version that they couldn't even pull together before that moment. It's like it switches on. And I think it was the most painful thing for me to see these women who are trying to do everything, of reaching past themselves to try everything for their infants. And then they felt like they were failing. It very much spoke to me. It's like, oh, we're failing. Society is failing you. You should not have to do this on your own. So really the company, all of our fundraising since that time, all of that is really with just this one end goal of being there for mothers. So Avira means the female warrior in several languages in India. And the concept being that mothers are sacrificing their blood, sweat, tears, body, everything, like a warrior for their families. And if we are to really believe that they are making the sacrifice for all of us, then we should equip them with the tools like as a warrior. And so it's really that we create those kinds of support mechanisms where support is not there. And so more to come there. And I can't wait to come back on and share when we launch and get some of your direct feedback.
So maybe what we can talk about next, Tina, is maybe if you could touch a little bit more on your personal postpartum experience and how that was for you. And obviously we understand now how that impacted your journey into Avira, but what kind of happened postpartum, what you learned from it, what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, so the very first time I had a clue into that postpartum, that there is something going on in the world else outside of the US that is a little bit different than what we're expecting with postpartum, is when I had a friend who was a bit older than me. She had her infant, and I was down in the cafeteria with her father-in-law. We were getting some stuff for her, and we were sitting there and eating something. My background is from Kerala, India. And so he's also from Kerala. And he was telling me, because we were getting cafeteria food for her. And he was saying that there is a very particular diet that is prescribed and given to women in the days after they have an infant. In fact, someone is brought in from outside to collect and give very specific spices and herbs and cook the food that is just for a woman who just had an infant. And in those days, they're really treated like a queen, they have rest and daily massages. And I remember hearing this and I'm like, no, how could that be the case that is happening in India? And I've never heard of anything of the sort in the US, right? In fact, my mom was a nurse who came as an immigrant here and she didn't have her mother around. So I didn't realize the cultural shift that my mother had gone through, being quite alone actually in those first months, and that was a break in cultural practice. And so that was my first clue, not just into there are these other practices, but there's something going on. There's some importance to this time period after you have an infant that is conveyed through these practices. There's something not being said here. And then I have 3 girls. I had my first, and that was 11 years ago now. And I remember the moment when I was in the hospital room. I'm holding my baby, Veera, and my family starts to come into the room. It had been an hour, and both sides of the family come around the bed, my husband's side, my side, my brother-in-law, and everyone's surrounding the bed, just kind of looking at the two of us and surrounding the two of us. And something there was something I was feeling, but I couldn't pinpoint it until I looked at the picture later. And it made me realize that, I had planned, I had wanted, I had prayed for this baby, but despite all of that, there was no lineage for this family unless I was bringing her forward. That was, whether I knew it or not, that was on me. And there's also this hidden quietness. There are so many things that can go wrong in pregnancy, in childbirth, afterwards. And I think that was very, very hard for me to swallow, because we weren't acknowledging women for this huge risk they were taking on behalf of everybody else. And they have to do it. So then if they are taking the risk, if they're being brave, and if they're going through all the motions, and if they're doing that, then we need to give them fair attention and honor for what they have done. And the first step of those is taking care of them when they're broken, right? And so that was really the budding.
I think it's so funny because we have friends who have children, and I hear like their birth stories. We've both done our OB rotations. But then when I hear those stories and after they're like, well, I blacked it out, so I don't really remember. And I'm like, no, I now remember. I remember, and I don't have the baby to black it out. And then obviously as pediatricians, we see all the ways that, things can go wrong. And 99.99% of the time, things don't. But the 0.01%, that's what we're there for and what we see. And so I think it really is a unique position to actually be a mom and have that experience and see that and see those differences. And you're right, motherhood is such a special process, such a special, powerful role to play. And I love the way that you worded all of that, because even now I'm like, oh, you're right. The world is on our shoulders. And it's nice to be reminded of that and to think of that, because then we're like, no, we need all these resources. We deserve all these things so that we can do what we need to do. But yeah, it is very different to be a pediatrician who has not had a child yet, because we just haven't gone through that experience. We can imagine it, we can see it from the other side, but it's not the same as actually being in it.
I also see it in we're both outpatient pediatricians, so we have that continuity with moms. We see them bringing in the baby with the family, like at the 2 month, 4 month, 6 month. Like I was following a mom who was struggling to gain weight. Breastfeeding wasn't working for her. Her family lived abroad, so didn't have that support. So it was a very anxiety-inducing, stressful experience for the mom. And we finally just had to sit down, like a talk, like, how are you doing? And she's like, no one has asked me that. Throughout this whole process, she's really feeling the lack of support, had tons and tons of anxiety, insomnia, not sleeping, and more so. And so coming from someone who doesn't have a family or hasn't gone through the birthing process quite yet, made me be more in tune with myself, was taking notes as well for my future self.
And I guess we can kind of dive in, but essentially what's going on is that in that period of you built up a baby over 9 months, and then suddenly it's a much more abrupt departure from when you separate from the baby. It feels more abrupt, right? Like you feel when the baby leaves you. It's something I always almost started looking forward to my births, like that feeling. I don't know if I looked forward to it actually, because it felt like she was gone, right? Yeah. But it's very sudden, and there are all these shifts in your body with that suddenness. Obviously, the physical mechanics of baby leaving your body and all that does in places that can't be seen. So when I talk to some researchers, there are studies about ultrasound technology inside the body, to understand not just, okay, is it a perineal tear, but what are the other ligaments, muscles, et cetera, that are undergoing stresses. And so you have this mechanical piece of it. But you have to think that in this shift of I had a baby and I now have a baby to take care of, you are also in the exact same moment recovering from a large medical event. Culture has built over thousands of years on how you can care for the infant, and take care for the mother so she has almost no responsibilities and that there is complete recovery. And so I think we can talk about how we can translate that in the US, but in a lot of places, if you take maybe Indian women who are in the US, you have moms flying from across the globe to come be with their daughters who are about to have babies. Traditionally, you have women going back to their mother's houses and staying there for a month before and 3 months after. That's one way it's done. And now even centers where you're going through some of these caretaking. And I mean, some of this care is we're talking about daily massages for you and for the baby, being bathed with herbs and spices, a diet that is might be more than the family could afford to eat altogether, but it's given to the mother at that time to replenish her strength. And the one that always gets me is there's a saying, 42 days for 42 years of healthy life, saying that if you do the right things at that time, that woman who's going to be the pillar of the family, it'll reverberate in her health by not having problems of not taking care of some of her health for a long, long life. And so it's nice to think about the fact that you're really focusing on her long-term health. And if you don't, this can be something detrimental.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting how much that is so different from Western society, and like being someone of an Indian culture in Western society, and like reckoning with the stark differences between the two and trying to balance between the two. I mean, my mom in particular too, balancing that when she was pregnant with me, and then my sister doing dental school here, having just moved here. Her parents didn't live here. And then I think afterward, that whole process, and she went through some issues in pregnancy too, where she had pretty significant jaundice, and like she went to her OB here, and they were like, you just have to deal with it. It'll be okay. And my dad and both of their parents were like, no, that's not acceptable. She got on a plane. She went to India. There's like this particular plant or herb that kind of upregulates like bilirubin excretion and things like that. And so she had like a whole like process in India where she went through all this care to get rid of the jaundice and came right back over. And I always think about how that whole process must have been so interesting for her to be in a new world but have like the culture tenets of a different one, and balancing that. And so for you, I can only imagine what that process was like, of right from everyone looking at you and you're like, I'm in a Western hospital bed, everyone's looking at me, but I know what my culture is like, and then trying to balance the two afterward when they're just so different.
I made so many mistakes. It was laughable knowing I didn't know too much about it. I just knew what my mother and my mother-in-law were trying to, they were bestowing all of this on me. But I remember like running up and down the stairs in our townhome, and in the first week or something, and my mom is looking at me like, what are you doing? Like, why are you? So, I mean, it comes down to like not even lifting, that you're not even holding the infant in those first weeks because of what that does to your abdominal muscles. Nonetheless, like moving a ton and stitches and all of it. And so it was so hard for me with my first to change the course of who I was as a person, someone who was busy and, got up and did things all day long. And suddenly it really required a lot of stillness and a lot of concentrating on myself. And it was so difficult. And then after my second is when I started this company, and I went, able to go look into like what's actually happening in this postpartum time period. And so this last, I have a 10-month-old, and this last delivery, pregnancy, postpartum time period was the best of all three. And I'm like 39. And so there's many reasons that it could have gone haywire. I was scared that it would be difficult, that I'd have more risks that I'd need to face. But I think I had accepted that this time period is going to be one where I need to heal. And I asked for all the things. And my mother and my mother-in-law gave me all the things. I mean, as some examples, like my mom daily rubbed me down with oils and assisted me in the shower so that I wasn't bending and doing things inappropriately. And I was largely cocooned in our master bedroom with baby, if baby was breastfeeding. And the most movement that I really did in those first weeks was like to the bathroom, to the shower. Moms both mothers were there. My husband was there at times and switching off, and they brought meals, they brought warm food, and they did all the diapering. They did the bathing of the baby. They would lift and bring the baby over. And, I think the first time around, I felt like, no, like I can't like put all of that on other people. And by the third time around is like, oh, I deserve this. And so it was a shift.
You were like,
I can, and
I'll take all the help I can get.
Yes.
Can you so I think this is getting into the specifics, because it sounds like your journey with your first two kids was not the same as your postpartum journey with your third. You kind of already touched on like the oil massages, the being isolated, cocooned in your master bedroom with your baby while feeding, the certain diet. Can you kind of list the more Eastern principles and practices you adopted in your postpartum journey versus maybe, and how it differs from the Western postpartum period?
Yeah, so the three big tenets are, it really comes down to like rest, food, and healing. So rest, number one, that you had, let's say we pretend it was an injury, right? You had an injury, you need to rest and recover from that. And it's not only just important because your body needs to recover, you are going to be relied on very heavily to breastfeed this baby, to take care of this infant, to now raise your family. So rest, and we're talking about like more hours horizontal than you are vertical by far. In some cultures, there is no reading or texting. There is really, you are just made to really lie and be in your bed or within very close to your bed we're on the order of, 30 to 42 days. And this includes not lifting the baby, right? So from a food perspective, it is really about, imagine that you had this warm, lovely little infant inside of you, growing inside of you, and bringing all this additional blood, circulation, heat, warmth in your body. And suddenly it's a very abrupt when the baby leaves. In your cavities open, it's more widely open, and your organs kind of drop back into place, and they have a lot of space around them. So there's this conceptual thought of coldness, that you are suddenly a lot more cold. Really, there is this keeping warmth in your body. One of them is binding. So just getting all the organs back close together so they don't feel cold and restricted. We often think of binding as like getting back in, getting the body back into shape, but it really also has this warmth, bringing all the organs close together so they know where to be. And then from a food perspective, foods that bring you warmth. So no cold drinks. It's either room temperature or you're having an abundance of warm foods. And also in the start, it's very liquidy. So you think that you have your intestines, and when you're pregnant, this is one of the things that is almost the most difficult. The baby pushes up higher and higher, and you have like this much space where all of your intestines get smushed into. Suddenly it drops into place, and it's almost like they're really tender. Like they have all this space, but they haven't been worked and used. And so I remember when I had my first, I was living in New Jersey, and I had like a hoagie. Like I was like, oh, I haven't had a deli sandwich. It was probably, now looking back at what I know, like having bread and something dry and something that's like that bulky is not the best thing to be gentle on your intestines. There's a lot of rice soup. There is a ton of bone broth that, at least if you have, especially if you are not on a vegetarian diet, there is like collagen from bone broth, a lot of soups that are built in, or it'll be lentil-based soups. And really starting off with slow for the mom's digestion, like you're treating her a little bit like a baby so that she's kind of easing back into all of this extra space that's been in. Other warming foods, ginger, a lot of ginger and garlic in foods, a lot of cumin, a ton of turmeric. So in Indian food, we cook everything with turmeric. It's almost in every single dish. But like if you saw the bright yellowness of the rice my mom was making me, it was like, it's there because it's known as a healing food. At the same time, you're limiting kind of gas producing foods. So no cruciferous vegetables like cabbage and broccoli, things that are going to create gas or reduce your breast milk. Moong dal, I think, was like one of the few things that was allowed at that time. And so really carefully having foods that were enriching and warming. I had a lot of teas. So the raspberry nettle tea and just a lot of warm liquid, constantly warm liquid. If that's something that was something I think I created before the baby. I would like create bone broths, and we would store it in the fridge and in the freezer. But having these things where I was preparing for myself, and I know I'm investing myself, was something that really helped that time period.
So for a lot of our listeners are parents who don't have their own parents to use as resources for like all these Ayurvedic tenets and all these like Eastern-based practices. Is there any other research you did, or are there any other sources that, our listeners can look to who are preparing for that postpartum period?
Yeah, so off the bat, I would recommend The First 40 Days by Heng Wu. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing her name, but I've gifted that book so many times, and it has both recipes, But it also has this beautiful frame of mind to walk through about what is about to happen to your body and how to think about all this. And then it works in all these cultural background from around the world. And so I think that's a wonderful resource I would highly recommend. The interesting thing in coming to today, kind of thinking about some of the background, I'm like, how did we get to this place where we're not doing this? It's interesting because in colonial US and in Western Europe and in Europe, these were all practices like sitting in or lying in was part of the first 30 days, 4 days, and was often like neighbors who would cook for you or women around you who would be doing your cooking. And it was actually, I actually assumed that it was the advent of modern medicine, the decrease of, maternal mortality, infant mortality that kind of shifted it to like, we don't need to do this. It was actually the Industrial Revolution. So it was actually this ability to be hyperproductive and multiple people, women including, being in the workforce that just overshadowed. And so it's a kind of eye opener because it's not that we don't need it. And that's the first thing that you feel when you're coming out of those days. It's like, I feel like my body feels like it's just lacking so much. And so it is actually that we turn towards being able to work, being able to provide for our families, and providing additional income. And then this Industrial Revolution, which allowed us to kind of focus on those things. But in actuality, it is not because we didn't need or that we don't need. Our bodies have not changed in any significant way in the last 100 years that we don't need that kind of commitment.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because too, like Deshna was mentioning, the parents that we see, sometimes their parents can't help or they're not available or they have to fly really far, and we don't have those what we think are basic necessities, but in this world maybe isn't quite possible. And so I think it's very interesting when I see some of these videos on the internet of friends who come over and like do the laundry or cook for them or things like that. And so maybe our new village isn't necessarily family because sometimes we've immigrated elsewhere and things like that, but maybe our new family is kind of finding ways to rebuild like the neighbor community and the friends community. And then as women, like supporting each other when each of us kind of comes to our time of postpartum period. But I think that sounds so valuable, and that really is the thing that we hear the most of when we're saying, how are you doing, do you have support? They're like, no, I really don't. I think that really is the biggest pain point. I think moms, like you said, will do anything they need to for their baby, and that was kind of a long time ago, but not that long ago at the same time. But it's changed things so much, and I think now we're in this really cool place where people want to restore that balance a little bit more. People are fighting for more time off to actually stay at home with the kids and actually have that recovery time period.
I think we need a reset button. Touching on your, Aniksha, you mentioned like time off, and I think we made a mental note to talk about this, but you said 42, something, along those lines. Like most women do not have 42 days to fully like reset, adopt all these tenets before they have to return to like a 9 to 5. We're in a society that promotes procreation and like, furthering your lineage, but there aren't many policies or governmental policies to support that and to support moms like during and beyond.
I find like it's almost curious to me for clinicians specifically. I feel like it's some of the lowest guaranteed time, because if you nowadays you have some like amazing companies doing like 6 months time off for each parent, even the father, or the partner. And but when I hear about clinicians and physicians and hospital practices, it's always like I hear about women going back in 2 weeks, which is like quite the abomination for their body, right?
I was just going to say, I mean, those same women, female clinicians are, during pregnancy, pulling 24 or 30-hour shifts and working night shifts, and there's already ample evidence to show that that can have negative consequences on birth, on baby, and things like that. So there's so much that needs to change in that space, and I think it's something that I think even during residency, a lot of pregnant residents would bring up and things like that, and something that's just slow to change. But yeah, it's crazy that in the field where we know where and why and how things go wrong, we can't quite change things there too. So it really just speaks to all the hurdles and how slow things are to change, even if we have all the evidence in front of us.
Yeah, and one thing that was like when I started having worked in devices that were agnostic to whether they were male or female oriented devices, and then working specifically towards breastfeeding, I wondered what the support would be like around a company that has to do with breastfeeding. I think a majority of male investors and also a lot of fathers who are like, oh, I watched this. I watched this terrible breastfeeding experience and it was gruesome and we would have paid anything. But if the system isn't there, you kind of ask for what you need and you see how it goes. And sometimes it becomes what the women around you start to ask for too. So, hey, I'm going to plan for the 6 months off. I'm going to set aside the money to make this happen. We're going to do this. You know, if you can't pay me, then that's fine. But is that okay? And I was surprised at how often that would get yeses. Oh, okay. Is that what you want to do? And then it kind of provided a little bit more confidence to like, okay, no, well, I can ask for that, you know? And so I'm saying like, you deserve it. You deserve that and more. And that's the interesting thing when you hear about like Europe and some where you have maybe close to a year off for each parent. It's not because the babies are worth more, right? Or the parents are worth more there. It's because that system is in place. And so we're going to need to reset and we need to go in with confidence that this is worth changing too.
And I think it makes me feel hopeful because now we have like people like you putting this out there. I think it'll be slow to change, like because again, it's a systematic process. But I'm so glad we're talking about it so much more now, and it's like becoming more and more popular as like advocated for, should I say? There's
like a image that's been in my head for such a long time, especially when I started the company. It's like, you know, it's like, I don't know if I've explained this to others sometimes. Like when I went through grade school and then went through college, I was an engineer. You know, there's a lot of males in engineering, but I never felt that difference of I'm not able to compete or, you know, and even in the workforce, you would see maybe more men in management, but you would see, but we were, you know, I didn't feel like I was short of anything. And then the second I had a baby, it was like a sudden realization. It's like, oh, this is only my task. It is not something that I can do with the same resources because I am required to do so much more. So it's almost like you're kind of like rising in life and then there's just something that happens where everyone can keep going, but you can't. And so that is really our responsibility to give more resource to the person who has to do more at that moment in their life.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're describing is equity. Like women don't have enough equity in this kind of society to be able to brought up to where everybody else is at, and they have more tasks, more responsibility. That responsibility isn't just one more task. It's actually a huge lifelong responsibility that changes and adjusts. So yeah, I think that's very true. I think we'd love to know from your perspective as clinicians, is there anything from your experience where you saw either what the OB or the pediatrician was doing that made you feel, yes, I feel really supported and seen in the moment, or I wish they had asked, or I wish they had given me this thing now that I'm kind of at that intersection of the healthcare world? Is there anything you saw that you wish clinicians did more or do really well that they should do more of?
Yeah, so from the class of on its own of lactation consultants and really having someone in your room if possible or coming to your home, that's always something from the breastfeeding perspective that I highly valued and always recommend to women. But I laugh because I think about like that just to the recognition, and some pediatricians really do a great job of this. It's like just a recognition when you come in on that first week or the first 2 weeks that you are like a holistic mess, and that like knowing like it's okay. I recognize that this is a crazy time period. That goes a very long way. Like I remember that when with my first, I went to it was like 1 week pediatric appointment, and was it 1 week or 3 days or 4 days? I don't know. But it was also timed with the first time that I had to go number 2. And it was like one of those, oh no. I was looking at my husband, I was like, where is the bathroom? Like where, it was like one of those moments that this would never be a normal thing that someone is scared about. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening while I'm not in my home. Like in the pediatrician's office. And I laugh because those are just one of those things that are so private and internal to the first days or the things that you go through. And as your body's recovering, you're basically, if you don't know, you're just really fearful about how it's going to feel or how it's going to hurt with all stitches and all kinds of things going on. And so just an understanding of like knowing that this is the kind of things that bodily they're facing, that the best system would actually be if someone came to the mom on for those first visits, that they weren't having to leave their house, right? And out of their cocoon, but knowing that they have that, like, just that welcoming and that recognition of that goes a long way. I've heard wonderful stories about how, like, sometimes it's the pediatrician who's like, hey, I see you. You're going to be okay. You're doing everything you can in breastfeeding. And I mean, these moms talk about it for years, that one conversation for
Yeah.
years, right? That like they were the one who looked at me and said, it's going to be okay. Not many people see them in that time period. I am curious, just from your experiences, have you heard of, or did your mothers have postpartum experiences or your cousins or anything of that nature that you had heard of that's here in the US or back in India that might be different from Kerala ones?
I think it's pretty similar. And again, I think it's because like Ayurveda is so strong in India. Like, I feel like it's pretty universal in that sense. It stems from the same tenets. So I'll have to ask more details about my own mom's experience, but she was of course, like Aniksha mentioned with her own mom, an immigrant here. Her mom was not able to come for my birth and she had her mother-in-law or my grandma, but there was a lot of health issues there. So wasn't as involved. My friend recently gave birth and she had both of her moms, like her mom and her mother-in-law, come and fly down, or they each took time off. It was like a 2-week and a 2-week period. So that was really nice to see.
Yeah, I think similar for us too. Both my parents are two different types of South Indian. So I think it's very similar in that idea of like restoring and rebalancing from like a heightened vata. So I think for our listeners who don't understand, there's different body types or doshas, and that's very similar in traditional Chinese medicine as well. But this idea of vata, what you were explaining, Tina, of like there's this like airiness, this dryness, you've lost all this blood, all this fluid, you're very cold. And so all the ideas are to kind of bring everything back into balance. And so I think very similar. And then, I think same again, my parents being immigrants here and then having family so far away. I think at some point, my younger sister actually went to live with my grandparents for a while. And I think in India, that's very normal because everyone's in the same place and that's very normal and expected. But then when you have parents moving to an entirely different country, there's this new culture of sometimes your child goes to live with your grandparents or stays with their grandparents for a bit of period of time while the mom recovers or goes back to work. So there's like this new balance of trying to mix the two. And it probably feels and seems strange. I think growing up, we were like, why is that? But now that I'm an adult, I can only imagine my mom was such a total rock star going through grad school and doing all these things, taking care of 2 kids, making new friends, making a new community for her whole family. Like I can only imagine. And so that's where you lean on your parents in new ways and you just kind of do the best that you can, whether you think it's right or wrong or whatever. You just do what you know is best and go from there. But for the most part, I think everything was pretty similar. How much my mom got to do of the 40 days, I don't think she got a lot out of it. I feel like she's owed like a million days back after all of that. But otherwise, pretty similar. Yeah.
It's really beautiful. I think there is a special place that when we look at immigrant mothers or immigrant mothers that sometimes the amount that they have done and that they have sacrificed for you, even beyond normal circumstances, like in the midst of a lot of change, I think it's a little bit of it's touching, but also a driver for me and even in this business.
I love that. Let's transition into our wrap up / rapid fire practical takeaways. Basically, summary of all the things we've talked about. What is one postpartum myth you'd like to debunk?
That you can do this alone, that you are just going to heal by yourself and without and be able to take care of a baby at the same time. It sounds crazy, and it is crazy.
What is one postpartum practice you wish every new parent experienced and prioritized?
So hands on your body, like massage or assist during shower, because it embodies it. Whoever is in the room doing that with you, whether it's your partner or your mother, your mother-in-law, it just verifies that this person, that she needs this kind of care and that she needs this level of love. And also like to be able to be held a little bit and, and felt that wasn't just that now this baby is here. It's that I went through a lot of sacrifice for that. And sometimes really nice bonding between partners.
Absolutely.
I thought, I was hoping you would, because every time you mentioned it during this episode, I was like, that sounds like that would be amazing after what I just put my body through. That sounds great. Yeah. Like I like it now. I can only imagine after doing something like that. Like I'm going to need more than before.
What is, for our parents who are just about to enter the postpartum period, what is your one-liner advice to kind of ease their nerves, or just anything you want them to know?
So everybody's going through it and nobody's talking about it. It is the best kept secret, parenting, postpartum, breastfeeding. The issues with breastfeeding, I mean, you don't know how many interviews I've done with moms who've said, I know it's just me, but I had difficulty with breastfeeding. And it is 92% of women who go through some kind of issue with breastfeeding. And it is 100% of women who need to heal. So talk to that mom who you might have, who just had that baby, or, a friend who had a baby. You will be able to connect with them in a completely different way. And they will tell you completely different stories than before you had that baby.
That's amazing.
I think we talked a lot about very important things, but the takeaway is mother's health is infant health, and the better care you take of yourself in the postpartum period, the better that's like foundational to the child's health and how they'll grow and how they'll progress and develop.
I think for the entirety that you are a mom, you feel guilty leaving that baby or making anything that has to do any decision for yourself unless the baby is happier in that moment than they would have been with you. And I think that's kind of, if we can alleviate, if we can take care of her, she is going to take care of. She is going to give everything to her baby. So props to you all and for the good work you're doing. And I'm so thankful and happy that you had me on.
We're so grateful to have you on. This was absolutely amazing. And for all the work that you're doing, not only for your 3 daughters, but for everyone, and maybe even for us, depending on the timing of everything. And it's so wonderful. I think I love any episode where we can just reiterate how amazing women are. And you started off by calling all of us warriors.
Have you back on in the future when you're ready to launch, you're launching, and more about that. But for those who want to see more and want to see more of what you're doing, where can they go? Do you have any resources that they can sign up for and follow along?
Yes, so you can go to meetveera.com and you can sign up and get on our email list. And you can follow me on LinkedIn under Tina John, CEO of Veera, and you'll get to hear the latest and what's happening and all the amazing support we've been having in the community and over the years.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Tina. This was such an awesome episode, and we're excited to hear more. And for all our listeners, thanks for listening and watching, and we're excited to see you guys at the next one. Thanks so much.
We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.